Ray Ray Harm was a damn good independent trucker. He smoked Marlboro Reds, like all the real truckers smoked, wore only Western-style shirts, and a worn-out pair of cowboy boots. His hair was shaggy with thick sideburns, and his rig was a restored 1977 Peterbilt 352 cabover with a black, silver, and red paint scheme. Ray Ray was also damn good at murder. Being an independent trucker, he was able to choose the routes he wanted. He purposefully kept them random, making it more difficult to track him down or even identify that it was a trucker doing the killing. And by his last count, over a 20-year period, he had killed 664 people, roughly 13 in each of the 48 states he traveled. He tried to keep his killing down to 20 or 30 a year, but that wasn't always easy to do. There were times when he was eastbound and down, loaded up in trucking, and the need just got too damn much, and he couldn't help himself. During those times, he eventually gave in and found a few extra folks to kill. Most serial killers have a certain kink that got them off. Like, some guys only wanted to kill redheads. Others wanted to kill only bald, middle-aged men. Some wanted to kill women who looked like their mothers. But not Ray Ray. He was an equal opportunity killer. It didn't matter to him their gender or their race or hair color. He killed all types of folks. Men folk, women folk, fat folks, skinny folks, black folks, white folks, wealthy folks, and poor folks. He tried to shy away from the prostitutes that worked the truck stops. The other truckers and the cops called these women lot lizards. He'd killed a few over the years, but when lot lizard bodies started piling up, it was a huge clue that it was a trucker who was on a killing spree. He wasn't also into killing for any sexual release, like some of those weirdo serial killers. For Ray Ray, it was all about power. The fear in his victims' eyes, their pleading, and the fact that he was in complete control. Even though he loved killing, about a year ago it had gotten a bit stale, and he had decided to spice it up a bit. He took his inspiration from that old trucker song by C.W. McCall. The line that gave him his idea was, "Pigpen, this here's the rubber duck. I'm about to put the hammer down." So, every third murder, he would smash his victim's head with a hammer and leave a rubber duck next to the body. He'd hoped that the FBI would get involved, thinking he was one of those weirdo serial killers, and they had. He wasn't afraid of being caught. He was too smart for that. Besides, they'd never make the connection to the song because nobody listened to good music anymore. But knowing America's most powerful police agency was after him brought a new level of thrill to his killing. A few nights back, he'd picked up a load in New Orleans that was to go to a place in Georgia called Nevermore Hollows out on the coast. He wasn't sure what a hick town would need with such a big load of coffins, voodoo dolls, and absinthe, but hey, who was he to judge, right? Around 11 p.m. on a dark stretch of Louisiana interstate, he'd picked up a 20-year-old hitchhiker named Kevin. Kevin said he had just dropped out of college and was headed back to Atlanta. They shot the breeze for an hour or so. Then, stating that he needed to take a whiz, Ray Ray pulled into a deserted rest area, forced Kevin out of the truck by gunpoint, and walked him over to one of the picnic tables that sat under a covered pavilion. Ray Ray had to work quickly, even though the rest stop was currently dark and deserted, and if he was honest, a bit creepy. At any moment, someone might pull in. So, he only allowed Kevin about 3 minutes of begging before he used his hammer and bashed his brains out. He positioned the body so that it was splayed out on the picnic table, then placed one of his little yellow rubber ducks beside the mess. Back in the rig, trucking toward Nevermore Hollows, Ray Ray realized that Kevin's murder wasn't as satisfying as he had hoped. And he really didn't think that the body would be found by the FBI due to it being dragged off into the swamp by some Louisiana scavenger, so the thrill of the kill was diminished. Therefore, it only took a couple of hours before he was itching for another. He forced himself to wait until he dropped off his load in Nevermore. He got a kick thinking about how the terrible things he would do to his next victim would shock that little crap hole of a town. He pulled into Nevermore at 3 o'clock on Thursday. He dropped the coffins at the Lamentation Brothers funeral home, then the absinthe at Lucifer's Liquors, and the voodoo dolls at a shop called Sister Gardenia's Psychic Readings. It was near dark when he had finished unloading the last of his haul, and he was itching bad for a kill. He had come to realize that the town was smaller than he had thought, and was afraid it was a bit too close-knit, making it tricky to lure his next kill. He'd have to be very careful not to draw too much attention to himself. He decided to grab some food and think it over. This town was way too small for a truck stop, but he'd seen a choke and puke called Winona's Waffle Hut on his way in. It sat a few miles beyond the town's limits, and if he was lucky, the food would be good. And he might be able to find his next victim there as well. The fact that there was no truck stop was fine with him. That meant that he'd not be tempted to pick up a lot lizard who was prostituting herself to feed whatever monkey was riding on her back. Those women usually put up little or no fight because they were just eager to be free from their miserable lives. Ray Ray liked killing women who had something to live for, such as business women who were too smart for their own damn good, or housewives and mothers who loved their families. Those women were fun ones to kill because they fought back. But he'd take what he could find tonight. He was in bad need, and beggars can't be choosers. Winona sat between the outskirts of the town and the countryside. It looked like a small oasis of yellow light surrounded on 3 sides by dark woods. He parked at the edge of the lot, in as much shadow as he could, then went in and had some of the best damn waffles he'd ever had in his life. Surely there was some culinary magic happening at Winona's. While inside, he scoped out the clientele looking for a victim. It was busy. All the stools at the counter were filled, mostly with men who looked like farmers or who had worked in the trades. The tables in the center of the diner were being used by families on a night out. All but one of the booths were full of teenagers. He took the empty one, which just happened to give him the best view of the clientele. There was a black guy behind the counter. He was built like a linebacker, and Ray Ray could see that he was constantly scanning the diner as if on the lookout for danger. The guy's name tag said Isaac. Ray Ray didn't like black people too much and made sure to always try and kill as many of them as he could. But this Isaac guy seemed like he'd put up too much of a fight. Ray Ray liked it when they fought back, but he wasn't stupid, so he'd leave this big guy alone. At one of the booths sat 4 teenage girls. All were divas, wearing clothes that were too revealing, and they were deep in giggly talk about some hot guy on the baseball team. He considered the taller one. She was a beauty with red hair, milky skin, bright eyes. But she was clearly the queen diva, and it would likely be difficult to get her alone long enough to take her. He considered a few others as he ate his waffles, but by the time he'd finished, he'd resigned himself to the idea that none of these patrons would be good candidates. and he began to think that he wouldn't be able to satisfy his need, when suddenly he heard the bell over the door jingle. The woman who stepped into the diner was a mess. It was clear she'd been hooked on something for a long time. Her skin was ashy, gray, peeling in places from malnutrition and whatever concoction of chemicals she was using to poison her body. Her hair was greasy and matted, her eyes were sunken, her nose runny. She wore a threadbare black hoodie stained with grime. Only a few of the diners gave her a look, and those that did immediately wrote her off as a homeless nobody. Damn, Ray Ray thought. She won't put up much of a fight, but she'll have to do. It was difficult to tell the woman's age. Ray Ray guessed a road-worn 25. She shuffled to the counter and mumbled something to Isaac. The big guy motioned for her to take a seat at a stool that had just come open at the end of the bar. Then he put in an order for some food. It was clear he was going to give her a freebie. Ray Ray sat sipping his soda and watched Isaac put a plate containing a burger and fries in front of her. She glanced around, embarrassed, but Isaac engaged her in small talk, treating her as if she were like anyone else. The big guy put her at ease enough that she finally gave a sad smile and began nibbling at the food. Ray Ray was able to overhear that she gave Isaac her name when he had asked. It was Ophelia. Ray Ray decided that even though this girl would probably not put up a fight, she needed to die. It was the most humane thing he could do for her. So he made up his mind, settled on one of his tried and true strategies to lure people into his truck, and waited. She finally finished nibbling, not finishing the food, wiped her mouth with the back of her dirty hand, and sheepishly thanked Isaac. Then she headed toward the door. Ray Ray timed his own exit so that he could hold the door open for her, hoping to build upon the kindness that the big black guy had already shown her, and maybe keep her at ease enough to lure her into his truck. Ophelia was too beaten down by life and bad choices to look him in the eye, but she did mumble a sad thank you as she walked out into the parking lot. Ray Ray gave her an all-shucks smile and said,
"My pleasure."
Then, when the door had closed behind him, he said,
"I'd like to help you if I can, miss."
She glanced sideways at him, instantly wary. He almost felt pity for this girl. Up close like this, he could see how bad she looked. There were sores on her face and hands, and her skin was peeling worse than he had originally been able to notice. "No," she mumbled. "I'm okay now. Thank you." Ray Ray knew he had to play this just right. He said a polite,
"All right, then,"
and started walking across the parking lot, making it seem as if he was simply a nice man who had made a kind offer. This was also for the benefit of anyone inside who may be watching. He didn't want to call any unnecessary attention to himself. Ophelia waited a few heartbeats, clearly allowing him to get far enough ahead of her so that she didn't have to walk in front of him. This didn't bother Ray Ray. He'd be able to deal with that when he got closer to his rig. Finally, she started slowly across the lot after him, headed for the road. When Ray Ray got to his rig, he opened the door and started to climb inside. He paused and called to Ophelia.
"It's awfully dark out here. I'd be glad to give you a ride back into town."
Ophelia was 20 yards away now, staring down the dark country road. She gave him a nervous glance, seemed conflicted, After a moment, she shook her head. "I'm okay. I ain't got nowhere to go in town anyway." Ray Ray felt he had her on the hook, but he wanted to be cautious, to reel her in slowly. He finished climbing into the rig and pulled the door shut.
Sorry to hear that, Missy. I think I can relate to what you're going through. When I was a little boy, me and Mama lived in a van for a couple of years.
For the first time, she really looked at him. Even in the poor lighting, he could see her hope of someone truly understanding her plight in her sad eyes. Then, he delivered what he knew was the perfect line to gain her trust.
It got a little better for me and Mama because somebody offered to help. I think tonight is the night for you, Missy. You got a meal from that nice man in the diner there. And if you feel safe enough, I'd like to continue what he did for you. If you got family anywhere, I'd be willing to take you to them.
With that, he started up the rig. It growled to life, and its massive engine gave a hungry rumble as he waited for her response. Knowing she could not see what he was doing, from the center console he removed a syringe filled with a nice little concoction that would knock her out cold. The minute she let her guard down, he'd stab it into her leg. Then she'd be his to play with. He would drive to a nice, quiet place and park until she woke up. Then he could make her beg, thus making the kill more satisfying. She took a hesitant step toward him, clearly wanting more kindness and help, but wary of his offer. He could only imagine how much abuse this girl had experienced. She glanced nervously at the diner, then back at him. He could see she was crying. "I'm sorry," she said. "I just can't. But thank you. I'll be okay." Damn, he thought. So close. It seemed he just wasn't going to be able to seal the deal with this girl. Just before he put the rig in gear, she changed her mind and walked quickly over to him, as if she were trying to follow through while she still had the nerve to do so. She crawled up onto the passenger side, opened the door, and slid inside. But she left the door open in case she needed to jump out. What's your name, mister?" He kept the syringe in his left hand, hidden from sight between his leg and the door. He forced his hungry smile to look kind-hearted.
It's Raymond, but I go by Ray Ray.
She was crying, but not sobbing. She wiped the tears away with dirty hands. He saw her nails were long and black with grime. "I'm just not used to so much kindness in one night," she said. "I figured that big guy in the diner would throw me out, but he didn't. He treated me like a normal person. He even gave me some food for free, and you're offering me a ride to my family? It just seems too good to be true." Ray Ray knew he had her. He shook his head in what he hoped would be seen as empathy.
Just shut the door, girl.
Ophelia sat for a moment, the door still open. "I do want to go home," she said. "But I don't have any money to pay you for gas or anything. And even though you're being so nice, if you want sex or something, I'll do it, even though I don't want to." Preparing herself for either possibility, she pulled the door shut and unzipped her hoodie. Just tell me what you want." A hungry grin slid across Ray Ray's face. His left hand tingled in anticipation of using the syringe on her.
"It's not sex I want from you, girl."
He pushed the lock button on his side of the door. It had been modified to ensure that once engaged, the passenger door could not be opened. What does that mean?" Ophelia asked. Now that the door had shut, the cabin lights blinked off, and a shaft of sickly yellow light shot through the driver's side door. It left half of Ray Ray's face in shadow, showing only part of his twisted, hungry smile.
"It means that I'm going to cut you open and play with your intestines,"
Ray Ray said. He lashed out and stabbed the syringe down toward her leg, but she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, stopping him. She squeezed hard. Pain shot through his hand, up his forearm. "Not so fast," she said. Her voice had suddenly taken on a strange quality he couldn't identify. Then he realized it was a raspy lisp. Ray Ray tried to wrench free, but Ophelia dug her grimy nails into his skin, causing blood to drip from the 5 puncture wounds. Ophelia leaned into the sickly yellow light. Her nose and mouth were morphing into a rounded snout. Her eyes were no longer human. They were now glistening black orbs. She reached up with her free hand and peeled away her human flesh. To his horror, he saw that her face was that of some kind of lizard with slick red flesh. A thin black tongue flicked out of her mouth. "I taste your fear," she hissed. Ray Ray's mind reeled. He forced himself into action. He dropped the syringe. It fell onto her lap. He snatched at it with his free hand, but she flicked it off the seat and onto the floorboard at her feet. Ray Ray saw that her hands had morphed. They were now covered in that disgusting red flesh. The nails were now black claws. Still gripping his wrist, she reached out with her other hand and grabbed him by the hair. "Yes," she hissed. "Resist. It makes it so much better." Ray Ray opened his mouth to scream, but Ophelia leaned forward and put her lizard mouth over his. Her long, thin tongue flicked deep into his mouth and tickled the back of his throat. He squirmed, fought, tried to beg, but only gagged. Then, to his horror, he felt her thick saliva mix with his, and he lost all control of his body. He went limp, but was still completely aware of his surroundings. She pulled back, locked her black eyes onto his. "That's my poison," she hissed. "It paralyzes so I can eat you while you're still alive. See? The fear pumps adrenaline into your blood, makes it tastier." Ray Ray tried to scream, but was only able to emit a terrified groan. He realized that he had been duped and lured by this monster, and now there was nothing he could do about it. He couldn't even beg for mercy, not that it would matter. He'd never shown any mercy to any of his victims. Why should he expect to receive any from this monster? Ophelia used both her claw-fingered hands to peel away her hair and the rest of the human flesh. She tossed it onto the floorboard. Her lizard head was now completely revealed. Then she popped open his shirt and used one of those sharp claws to slice open his belly. With a hiss that was as lustful as it was hungry, Ophelia sniffed at the aroma of his blood. Then she leaned forward, pushed her snout into his stomach, and for what seemed an eternity, Ray Ray watched her eat.